Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our monthly conference cycle in Human Territory Society or Om Territoire Société. Every month we welcome a researcher working on social science and humanities in and about Indonesia. And this evening our guest lecturer is Prof. Michel Picard, distinguished professor from the French National Center for Scientific Research, also known as CNRS. And first of all, I would like to thank our partners, of course, the French School for Asian Studies, also known as AVO, the co-organizer of the event, and also the French National Research Institute for Sustainable Development, also known as IRD, for their technical assistance. And also, I would like to briefly introduce Michel. He is one of the founding members of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies in Paris. He holds a PhD from l'École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. His field is Balinese studies and specifically tourism, culture, identity, ethnicity, and religion, if I'm not mistaken. Also, I would like to remind you that Michel speaks perfectly bahasa Indonesia, so you could obviously ask in bahasa Indonesia in the question and answer session, and I will now talk anymore. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Pak Michel.
Ya, terima kasih banyak. Tapi sebetulnya bahasa Indonesia saya sangat jelek ya. Tadi bahasa Inggris sedikit lebih bagus. Jadi saya akan bicara dengan dalam bahasa Inggris. So the theme of my talk this evening is the construction of Balinese identity in the colonial era, Agama, Adat, and Budaya. So the island of Bali was one of the last regions of Indonesia to be subjugated by the Dutch. Its conquest was launched in 1846 and only completed in 1908. Yet, long before colonial administrators set about dealing with Balinese society, it had been imagined by Orientalists as a living museum of Indo-Japanese civilization, the only surviving heir to the Hindu heritage of Mojopahit, swept away from Java by the coming of Islam. Because Dutch officials held Hinduism to be the core of Balinese identity, they set out to turn Bali into a stronghold of Hinduism to counter the expansion of Islam throughout the archipelago. By thus looking for the singularity of Bali in its Hindu heritage and seeing Balinese identity as formed through an opposition to Islam, the Dutch established the frame of reference within which the Balinese would later on define themselves. Although the Dutch wanted to insulate Balinese society from disturbing foreign influences, Bali actually underwent drastic changes as a result of interference in native affairs by the colonial state. In particular, the requirements of a modern administration prompted the formation of a Balinese intelligentsia, the so-called kaum terpelajar, since the colonial state needed educated natives to mediate between the local population and the foreign rulers. The disruption caused by the occupation of the island compelled the first generation of Balinese educated in colonial schools to engage in a process of self-identification. In Singaraja, the seat of the colonial government on the north coast of the island, these Dutch-educated Balinese set up modern organizations and started publishing periodicals, a complete novelty for Bali. Devoted chiefly to social and religious issues, these publications were written not in Balinese, but in Malay, the language of Islam, as well as of colonial modernity. Thus, the same process which led the Balinese to question their identity was depriving them of their own words by making them think about themselves in a language which was not their own, but that used both by their fellow countrymen and by their colonial masters. Oops. Should be the other way around. You have to excuse me because last night I gave a ceramah in Bandung, and then because it rained and I got a cold, so I'm not in the best of my condition. The first of these organizations, Setiti Bali, was founded in 1917 by Igusti Bagus Cakratnamaya, a Pungawa, what would be known as Chamat, to counter the Javanese Islamic Association Sarekat Islam, which had recently opened a branch in Singaraja. Setiti Bali lasted until 1920 and was succeeded by an organization called Suwita Gama Tirta, established by Iketut Nasser, the head of a primary school, and presided over by Igusti Putu Jalantik, a descendant of the Raja of Buleleng. In 1923, these three influential figures set up the Santi Association, and in January 1924, they started publishing a periodical called Santi Adnyana. All these organizations had been opened to both the nobility, the Triwangsa, and to commoners, the Jabba. But tension was rife between the two groups, with the Jabba objecting to various privileges claimed by the Triwangsa. A conflict soon arose between the leaders of each faction, Cakratnamaya and Ketut Nasser. Cakratnamaya took over the publication of Santi Adnyana and changed its name to Bali Adnyana. The conflict escalated until a split between Jabba and Triwangsa became inevitable. In October 1925, Ketut Nasser started publishing his own periodical, Suryakanta, and the following month he set up the Suryakanta Association, whose membership was restricted to the Jabba. The situation became more confused after May 1926, with the founding of an organization named Chatur Wangsa Drio Gama Hindu Bali, which was controlled by Triwangsa and used Bali Adnyana as its mouthpiece. The authors who have commented on these organizations tended to stress the conflict, opposing the commoners to the nobility, a conflict they analyzed as a contest between the forces of progress and those of reaction. It's true that a substantial part of the debate between Suryakanta and Bali Adnyana concerned the Triwangsa's privileges, which had ground under the colonial policy and which the Jabba wanted to abolish in the name of progress, kemajuan. Yet, by focusing on the so-called caste conflict, pertentangan kasta, one misses the fact that even if they held opposite positions on many issues, Jabba and Triwangsa shared a similar vision of Balinese identity. The aim of Suryakanta was to raise the standing of the Jaba in Balinese society and to defend their rights. Most of its members were young school teachers and minor officials for whom colonial education had been a means of social mobility. They took as their mission to enlighten the Balinese people and prepare them for the advent of modern times, Jaman modern. The goals of Suryakanta were thus formulated in the statutes of the organization. First, to foster reason, mengutamakan budi. Second, to improve the economy, memperbaiki ekonomi. Third, to improve the fate of the commoners, memperbaiki nasib kaum Jaba. And fourth, to change the customs that were contrary to the progress of the times, mengubah adat yang berlawanan dengan kemajuan zaman. The means to these ends was Western-style education, pendidikan cara barat, seen as the foundation of progress. Thanks to the enlightenment acquired by their education, the Balinese would know which of the customs they should conserve and which they should reform, in accordance with the progress of the world, kemajuan dunia. In Suryakanta's view, the main obstacle to progress in Bali was caste prejudice and the privileges enjoyed by the Triwangsa. This was no longer acceptable for the Jaba, who demanded the same position in society as the Triwangsa: equality and solidarity, samarata, samarasa. Thanks to their education, the Jaba would raise their social status and be paid due respect by the Triwangsa. In other words, status in Balinese society should no longer be inherited but achieved. It should stem from merit and not from birth. Faced with such criticism, the Triwangsa attempted to defend their position as best as they could. To begin with, Chakratamaya accused his opponents of being motivated by envy in the foolish pursuit to abolish the caste system, system casta. By challenging the nobility, he claimed, the commoners were dividing the Balinese people and creating dissension among them. Then, Chakratamaya launched scathing attacks against the so-called progress pursued by Suryakanta. For him, far from improving the situation of the Balinese people, such a passion for progress, hawa nafsu maju, would only bring misery to Bali. Yet, Chakratamaya claimed to be a true advocate of progress. But his idea of progress was the one which had prevailed in the past when the aim was to fill one's mind. Kemajuan secara dulu adalah kemajuan untuk mengisi pikir, and not as it was in the present when it was only a matter of filling one's stomach. Kemajuan cara sekarang adalah kemajuan untuk mencari isi perut. Progress is welcome, he said, as long as it does not uproot the Balinese from their identity. Progress should not be forced upon the Balinese, the vast majority of whom were still ignorant, masih bodoh. But it should be the result of an evolution, evolusi, rather than of a revolution, revolusi. However, beyond the dispute between Suryakanta and Balianyana, Jaba and Triwangsa shared a common concern with the Balinese identity and were eager to preserve its foundations. In particular, both publications alike denounced Islamic proselytism in Bali and were concerned about the conversions of Balinese to Islam. It is in these publications that, for the first time, the Balinese began viewing themselves as a people, kita bangsa Bali. Until then, Balinese identified as members of a village community, a kinship group, or a temple congregation, rather than as Balinese. The collective identity took shape during the colonial period, when they attempted to define themselves as distinct not only from the foreign colonizers, but also from the other peoples in the Indies. In these publications, the Balinese presented themselves both as an ethnic group characterized by their own customs and as a religious community threatened by the expansion of Islam. Specifically, they defined their identity, which they called their Balinesness, kebalian, as being based on Agama and on Adat, kebalian kita, bahasa, Agama dan Adat. But far from expressing a primordial essence, as they claimed, these categories were alien and had to be appropriated by the Balinese according to their own references. While today the word Agama is translated as religion in Indonesia, one should know that it did not always have that meaning. In Sanskrit, Agama signifies that which has come down to the present, and it applies to anything handed down as fixed by tradition. Although it is difficult to establish when the word Agama came to mean religion in Indonesia, we know that in Javanese and Balinese textual traditions, it applied to codes related to the Indian Dharma Shastra, the treatises on Dharma, in which legal and religious features are not distinguished. We also know that from the 14th century onward, in Malay chronicles, Agama became associated with Islam and used in the sense of din. Therefore, one has to conclude that for centuries the word Agama in Indonesia had two distinct denotations, that of Dharma as well as that of Din, according to its context. By taking over the term Agama, Indonesian Muslims endowed it with new meaning, namely the exclusive worship of the one and only God, and the requirement of conversion to a foreign doctrine whose teachings are contained in a holy book revealed by a prophet. As a result, a sharp distinction was drawn between infidels and true believers. By taking on the meaning of religion, Agama was not only being dissociated from law, but also from tradition, which in Indonesia is rendered by the Arabic loanword Adat. In the same fashion as Dharma, Adat refers to the cosmic order and to social life in agreement with that order. This comprehensive scope of Adat was reduced by Islam, which confined its significance to customs that do not have a religious legitimation. In particular, the word Adat entered the language of Islamized populations to refer to indigenous customary law as opposed to Islamic religious law, hukum. Taken over by the Balinese, the word Adat replaced a diverse terminology for local customs, which governed the relationships between social groups and sanctioned communal solidarity in the villages. the incorporation of local customs into this generic term changed the meaning for the Balinese. What had been an interplay of significant differences deliberately fostered between villages became the locus of Balinese ethnic identity in the sense of a customary body of norms and institutions inherited by the Balinese people. As such, in Bali, Adat was not distinguished from Agama. Unlike the world religions that have a core of basic principles meaningful to peoples of diverse cultural backgrounds, Balinese ritual life is localized, connecting specific groups of people to one another, their ancestors, and their territory. It consists in a series of transactions with the invisible world, what the Balinese call the Niskala, in which human beings present offerings and worship in exchange for blessings of holy water that ensure the renewal of life and the regeneration of nature. Participation in these rites is a customary obligation for the Balinese, which sanctions membership in a village community, a kinship group, and a temple congregation. Rather than something to be believed in, Balinese ritual life is something to be carried out. Now, we don't know when Balinese started using the word Agama in the sense of religion. However, we know that in Bali, the word Agama retained its original polysemy, as we find in Balinese Indonesian dictionaries, which translate Agama as first Agama, second Hukum, and third Adat. We also know that Agama still had the meaning of Dharma in Bali throughout the colonial period. It is significant, for example, that in the catalogue designed by Balinese scholars for the Kirtia Library, set up in 1928 by the Dutch administration to preserve Balinese manuscripts, the entry Agama refers not to religion, but to law codes related to the Dharma Shastra. There is no entry corresponding to the category religion. We don't know either when Balinese actually chose to designate their own Agama as Hindu. But we do know that long before they defined themselves as Hindus, the Balinese had already been identified as Hindus by Orientalists. At a time when they had yet to learn the word Hinduism. And we know further that it is through the works of Dutch Orientalists that educated Balinese elites acquired the first information on Hinduism in the 20th century. While both Jabber and Triwangsa shared a common reference to Agama and Adat as the foundations of Kebalian, they held different opinions as to how Agama was connected with Adat on the one hand, and how Balinese religion was related to Indian Hinduism on the other. And it is this difference, as much as the more visible caste conflict, which explains the split between Jabber and Triwangsa. While the Triwangsa were determined to strengthen both tradition and religion, membutuhkan, Adat, dan Agama, the Jabber wanted to reform Agama while cleansing Adat of all the customs they deemed incompatible with the will of the times. Membutuhkan Agama dan merubah Adat yang bertentangan dengan kemauan zaman. Thus, for the Triwangsa, Balinese religion was based on tradition, Agama kita bangsa Bali, berdasar adat, from which it could not be separated. Adat dan agama dah boleh bercerai. Whereas for the Jabal, religion should be dissociated from a traditional order seen as an impediment to progress. Yet, they proved unable to differentiate between that which pertains to Adat and that which belongs to Agama. Kita tidak tahu membedakan yang mana Adat dan mana Agama. The inability of the Balinese to dissociate Agama from Adat did not stem only from the polysemy of these terms, but also from the fact that up until then, they had yet to single off a systems of belief and practices that could be demarcated from other aspects of the life and labeled religion. As it happens, Agama could not become a boundary marker for the Balinese before they began to view Islam as a threat. While Muslim communities, which had been living on the island for generations, had long been integrated within the indigenous social and cosmic order, by the 1920s, Balinese leaders had come to resent the increasing conversions of their court religionists to Islam. However, for them, Islam was seen not only as a threat, but also as a model of what a true religion should be. In this respect, one should pay attention to the controversy that has divided the Balinese over the proper name of the religion. This proved to be a highly contentious issue, which triggered a protracted conflict between those Balinese who wished to retain their local traditions and those who wanted to reform them in accordance with what they assumed Hinduism was about. In the past, the Balinese had no generic name for that which would later on become their religion. Once they had adopted the word Agama for that purpose, they referred to the religion simply as Agama Bali. Afterwards, Balinese started using a variety of names for the religion, such as Agama Tirtha, Agama Shiva, Agama Buddha, Agama Shiva Buddha, and later on Agama Hindu. In 1925, a dispute arose between commoners and the nobility over the name of the Balinese religion. The Triwangsa proposed to call the religion Agama Hindu Bali, stressing the fact that the Balinese had appropriated Agama Hindu to such an extent that it had become indigenous to the island. In this way, they were clearly trying to preserve the customary order by endorsing the religion actually practiced by the Balinese. The Jabba, on the other hand, proposed the name Agama Bali Hindu, which they defended by claiming that the Balinese were truly Hindus, even if their religious practices were corrupt due to their ignorance of the real nature of their religion. Consequently, in order to become the true Hindus they were supposed to be, the Balinese should discard all the local customs that contaminated the religious practices. Hence, the Triwangsa accused the Jabal of promoting a form of Hinduism similar to that found in India. This, they said, amounted to inventing a new religion, which was alien to the Balinese, because the religion originated not in India, but in Mojapahit. It was therefore the duty of the Balinese to remain faithful to the religion their ancestors had brought to Bali when they were fleeing the propagation of Islam in Java after the fall of Mojapahit. The tension between Java and Triwangsa receded in 1928 thanks to the combined efforts of leading Balinese aristocrats and Dutch officials who worked hard to diffuse what they saw as a political threat. The way to diffuse that threat was to culturalize Balinese identity. This was the aim of the colonial policy known as Balinization, Balisering, which was expected to promote a renaissance of Balinese culture. Designed by Dutch Orientalists, this policy was specifically intended for native youth, with the aim of making them conscious of the value of their cultural heritage by means of an education focusing on focusing on Balinese language, literature, and the arts. Now, culture and art as specific topics had so far been absent from Balinese reflections on their identity. In fact, just as the Balinese language has no term for religion or tradition, it also has none for culture or art. Yet, one begins to encounter occasional references to these topics in the 1920s. Thus, in Bali Adnyana, the terms peradaban Bali tended to become a substitute for kebalian. On the other hand, in Suriakanta, one sometimes found the Dutch word cultuur, while art was occasionally rendered by the Dutch term kunst. In 1930, the Kirtja launched the publication of the journal Bawah Negara, with the financial support of the colonial state. The articles published in Bawah Negara were markedly different from those in Suriakanta and Bali Adnyana. To begin with, a significant portion were in Balinese, as the Dutch had a political interest in fostering the consciousness of Balinese cultural identity as opposed to an identity based on national unity. On the agenda was Balinese culture, as specified in Bawah Negara's motto, a monthly newsletter dedicated to Balinese culture, Surat Bulanan untuk memperhatikan peradaban Bali. This interest in Balinese culture was taken up in the journal Jatayu, published by a new organization formed in 1936, Bali Dharma Laksana, whose statutes aimed at enhancing the progress of Balinese culture, mempertinggi kemajuan kebudayaan Bali. Thus, if the word for religion had been borrowed from Sanskrit, and that for tradition from Arabic, the notions of culture and art were initially acquired from Dutch before being appropriated from Malay. Bawah Negara's motto referred to peradaban, and one finds both the term culture and peradaban in its articles. In Jatayu, these terms tended to be replaced with kebudayaan, a neologism of Sanskrit origin whose root, Budaya, pointed to the development of the character of an individual before taking on the meaning of culture. As for Kesenian, which tended to replace the word kunst, its root, seni, meant refined before becoming understood in the sense of art. At the same time that Dutch Orientalists and Balinese intelligentsia were culturalizing Bali, the island's cultural image was being promoted by the development of tourism. Along with tourists, the artists and scholars who lived in Bali between the wars popularized the spectacular artistry of Balinese ceremonies. The written accounts, paintings, photographs, and films which recorded their journey to the island created a fabulous image of native life, an image which would be spread in due time by the promotional services of the tourism industry. Not only did they disseminate the image of Bali as a tourist paradise, but they identified Balinese society with its culture, which they viewed mostly in terms of its artistic and ritual manifestations. The Balinese intelligentsia appear to have been aware early on of this new fame of their island, to which they reacted in contrasting ways. The first reference to tourism that I was able to locate in Soyakanta were frankly negative. Thus, the author of an article titled Bali sebagai Museum Barong Kuno reproached the Balinese people for being seduced by the glamour of their island. They rejected the image of a living museum, Museum Hidup, propagated by Orientalists, and denounced the policy of cultural preservation conducted by the colonial government. As zealots of progress, the Jabba wanted Bali to shake off its archaic reputation and become a modern society with nothing about it to arouse the curiosity of tourists in search of the exotic. As could be expected, such a critical stance would find no place in Baliadniana, and even less so in Bawanagara. Indeed, the first writing by Balinese about their arts in this journal took obvious pride in evoking the artistic reputation of the island. Thus, an article on Balinese music, after having quoted a Dutch author expressing the widespread opinion that every Balinese is an artist, opened with the following statement: "Begitulah pendapatan orang asing. Kita bangsa Bali, suatu bangsa yang mencintai seni, berhaklah kita membesarkan hati tentang sifat kebangsaan kita sebagai tersebut di atas." While in the 1920s, the context of Balinese debate had remained essentially Balinese, during the 1930s, it was becoming increasingly Indonesian. In particular, the questions regarding the Balinese religion were re-emerging, more pressing than ever in Jatayu. By then, the Balinese were clearly on the defensive, as the controversy was no longer only due to disagreement among themselves, but to the fact that they did not know how to reply to accusations of idolatry, not only by Indonesian Muslims, but also by Christian missionaries who had recently been allowed to settle on their island. Faced with such a negative opinion, the Balinese reformers were intent on seeking an agreement on the true nature of the religion and on codifying its right accordingly. Thus, during the first Congress held in 1937, the leaders of Bali Dharma Laksana commissioned a committee of priests to compile a holy book, Kitab Suci, which would represent for the Balinese what the Quran is to Muslims. They assumed that once the Balinese knew what the religion was actually about, they would be in a better position to defend it against Muslims and Christians alike, and would be less tempted to embrace another faith. Unfortunately, 3 years later, the readers of Jatayu were informed that the attempt at composing a Kitab Suci had failed. The reason given was that in Bali, Agama could not be divorced from Adat, and Adat differed from one village to the next. Hence, the members of the committee could not agree on a religious canon valid for the whole island. After the integration of the island into the Indonesian state, the Balinese were compelled to discriminate between Agama and Adat so that the religion would be acknowledged as legitimate by the Kementerian Agama. In the process, Balinese Adat had to give up its former religious authority, while some of its aspects were singled out for their artistic qualities and relocated to the domain of Budaya, or rather Sunni Budaya. Later on, when the new order became involved in promoting tourism and expressed an interest in regional cultures, Balinese culture was requested to contribute both to the development of international tourism in Indonesia and to the fostering of Indonesian national culture. Eventually, with their Adat secularized and their Budaya touristified, Agama Hindu has become the distinctive marker of Kebalian. But this is another story which I'm not going to address now, as I've already been speaking far too long. So, sekian dan terima kasih.
Thank you, Pa Michel. For the first question and answer session, I would like to invite maybe two first questions. Yeah, and one more question. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Laurens. I'm from the Belgian Embassy and also a graduated anthropologist of Leiden University. I once read that the idea of Sang Yang Widiwasa as an almighty god for the Balinese people is also a product of the how do you call it, the nationalization of Indonesia, as the Pancasila is the fundament of it, as in like the belief in one god is the most important thing. Is it true that Sang Yang Widiwasa is a product of that nationalization of religion or stuff, or is it something which is already for a longer time going on in Bali?
Yeah, it's been going on in Bali for a long time, like several other appellations for a supreme deity. It was not a creation of national times. Some authors have claimed that in fact it was an invention of the Christians, arguing that it when Christian missionaries translated the Bible into Balinese, they used the word Sang Yang Widi or Sang Yang Widiwasa for the name of the only God in 1937. But in fact, that name had been in use in old Javanese texts. It's a long story. But the Balinese had dozens of appellations for that supreme deity, which was not that well known among the population as it became well known. It was only in the 1950s that it was officially adopted as the name of the newly sort of being reformed Balinese religion, in order before it had been accepted by the Kementerian Agama. Was done in the early 1950s, 52, 53.
And I have another question as well.
Okay.
Yeah. How do the small groups of Javanese Hindus in the mountains, more likely in the mountains here in Java. How do they relate to the Balinese Hinduism of Balinese Agama and Budaya?
It's a very complex and quite contentious topic. It was, I don't really remember the detail. It had been studied by Robert Effner, an American anthropologist, back in the 1970s, if I'm correct. In the 60s, some indigenous groups, ethnic groups in Indonesia, who didn't have a proper agama and were not acknowledged as having a proper agama by Kementerian Agama, had to decide what their agama would be and who their supreme god would be. So several of them affiliated themselves with the Balinese, but it was not always a clear-cut decision. And to be honest, I forgot how it happened in the Tenggabungan area.
Thank you. Maybe next question? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Made. I'm actually Balinese, but I work in Jakarta. Terima kasih. I have two questions. First question is about, I should say, the conflict between the three Wangsa in Java, because it affected me as well. That's one of the reasons why I moved to Jakarta finally. And I would like to ask, during your research, how this kind of conflict finally affected you through the collecting method. Because as you know, that most of the informations maybe come from the Triwangsa people. This has been this conflict has been going through years and years and affected everything in Bali, including for the political situations at the moment. Second question is about the provincial capital. Before, the capital of the province is located in North Bali, and finally it's moved to the southern part of Bali. And based on your research, most of that identity found in the north part of Bali, then how this provincial capital change finally affected the constructions of Bali's identity itself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm not sure I could reply to the second question. I mean, I know the Denpasar was chosen as the capital of the newly recognized province of Bali, which, if my memory is correct, goes back to 1958. Probably because it was more the airport had been already built. There had been a first airport in the 1930s, and so the center of the activities of the island went down south. But I don't have any specific information about why Denpasar was chosen as the capital of the newly defined province of Bali as opposed to Singaraja. Sorry, I'm not in very good shape. I just got a cold, so my mind is a bit fuzzy. I forgot the first question. I'm really sorry.
Between Sri Wangsa.
Oh yeah, Sri Wangsa. Yes, it's a conflict that has been going on for a long time. But I mean, you seem to assume that the Triwangsa had always the upper hand, which is not really the case, because they were quite strongly attacked by when the Jaba founded the Suryakanta organization. They were very vocal, and then after independence, there were several groups of forgot the istila, like the Pasek, the Sangguhu. So there were groups of so-called commoners of Jaba who formed powerful organizations and to counter the influence of the Triwangsa. So I agree that the conflict has been going on for a long time. I mean, my field of research started with the first publications by Balinese on these questions, which go back to 1925, in fact. So I don't have any earlier references about conflict between Jabo and Triwangsa, but it's a long story. What is quite sure is the fact that the conflict has been exacerbated by the colonial policy, as the Dutch, after having favorized the Jabo, very early on realized that it would be easier for them to govern Bali with the help of the Triwangsa. So they sort of froze the Wangsa situation back in 1910. And from then on, the Triwangsa had a much more clearly defined status in colonial society, and they asserted their power of the Jabo with the help of the Dutch administration. And also in this time, it seems that the Brahmana had the upper hand over the Kshatriya and the Vaishya, which was not always the case before that. It was thanks to the Dutch. The Dutch promoted the Brahmana against the Kshatriya. That's quite clear from Dutch documents, from the colonial documents. I don't know if I really answered your question. Sylvie? Non, peu encore. Oui, c'est bien sûr.
Maybe two last question. Yeah. And
my name is Dian. I just want to ask a short question. What about the identity of Bali Aga in Bali? Can you also consider or acknowledge about the indigenous peoples of Bali Aga there? Because they consider themselves as the people of Bali before the coming of the Majapahit people. Thank you.
Well, that's a difficult and contentious question. I mean, it seems that nowadays the majority of the Balinese consider themselves as Wang Majapahit. The historical reality behind that is very blurred. No one really knows. What is known is that the reference to Majapahit is quite recent. It's not older than the fall of Gelgel. I mean, it goes back to the late 18th century at the earliest. So it seems that it's a newly promoted myth for the Balinese nobility when the Balinese state started to being fragmented, and so various princely families, powerful families, wanted to back their status by more or less inventing or finding a connection with Majapahit. So there was a newly invented reference to Majapahit, which you don't find before that time.
thank you, Michel. Maybe, yeah, last question.
Okay, Pak. So my name is Chinta, and maybe I will ask about maybe more current conditions. So I've read like around 5 years ago that currently the identity in Bali has started, like the Balinese started to lose their kebalian due to the value, like since the commercialization of the culture that shift the value of the kebalian itself. And then therefore they established the Ajak Bali policy back in 2004 or 2014, I forgot, to re-educate the young Balinese and to regulate the newcomers. And I want to ask, like, what do you think about this current condition, and how will this kind of Ajak Bali policy will affect the future of Balinese socio-political conditions?
I'm not really sure I'm getting your point. Are you alluding to the so-called Ajak Bali movement?
Yeah, Ajak Bali movement.
No, Ajak Bali.
Yeah, Ajak Bali movement.
Well, Ajak Bali was a politically motivated reaction to the first bombing in 2002, with the head of the powerful Bali Post group trying to get the upper hand over other political figures, and he promoted the Ajak Bali movement to stir the Balinese against various threats that they were facing. So in those days, not only the bombing, but also the fact that there were more and more Muslim workers from Java, Madura, and Lombok mostly, who started settling in Bali because the Balinese tourism needed some workers, cheaper than the Balinese, to help building all the new infrastructures, and they promoted a sort of a fighting spirit of the Balinese against that general threat. Not only the bombing, but the foreign investors, Muslim migrants, and so on. And then after a while, as usual in Bali, that movement, that impetus declined. So today there's almost never any reference to Ajak Bali, but it lasted for quite a few years. So it started in 2002 and lasted for maybe 5-6 years. There were several. There were Guru Ajak Bali. There were cooperatives called Ajak Bali. There were various movements, but it all fiddled out. It's no longer really. It's more a reference to a specific period of the bombings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Michel, for your presentation, and thank you very much for your participation and your question. We hope to see you again our next conference in April, 9th of April, on political science this time. For now, I wish you all a good evening, and please enjoy some snacks in the lobby and a free time to continue the discussion with Pak Michel. Bonne soirée.